For more on this, let's bring in Peter Knight, Executive Director of WildAid. He joins us live from San Francisco. Welcome.
Good evening.
Now, this announcement by China to ban ivory trade by the end of this year is historic. How much of a game changer could this be?
Well, as your piece indicated, there's some estimates this is 70% of the global market in China. And so this really is a game changer. The price has already been falling quite drastically from about 50% of what it was a few years ago. But with this final announcement now from the government of China, we think those prices will fall a lot more, and that will mean the poaching will go down.
So why now? What does this move mean for China itself in terms of the benefits?
Well, I think the benefits are obviously to the elephants in Africa, but I think also, as China takes an increasing international global leadership role, this is amazing for China's international reputation, particularly in Africa, where China has a number of very important trading partners. This is a real sign of respect and concern and compassion from China.
So as we see this, for people who are perhaps unfamiliar with this industry, give us an idea of the size of the legal ivory trade in the last year or so.
Well, the legal ivory trade in China has only been 5 tons a year, but some estimates are that this legal trade has been used to launder or legitimize another 95 tons of ivory a year, to the point where this was 70% of the illegal market, which was representing 33,000 dead elephants a year.
So then what's being done to help crack down on the illegal market? What sort of approaches are being taken there?
Well, as you've heard, customs have been a lot more active in the last few years than previously in making seizures. In fact, one of the biggest wildlife seizures in China happened just before the end of the new year. So there's been more enforcement efforts. There's also been a lot of public education efforts and TV advertising, as has been mentioned. These haven't been small attempts. There's been hundreds of millions of dollars worth of media donated by Chinese state media to this end, to stopping wildlife trafficking. So we've really seen in the last 5 years, I think, seen a sea change in attitudes in China, and particularly with the new administration, their crackdowns on corruption, a more sensitivity to these issues. And that's good news for China. It's good news for the world's wildlife.
And as we're seeing more of these crackdowns, we're also seeing these stockpiles building up, and different countries are really taking different approaches. So when it comes to all these stockpiles, what's a really good approach that China should or can take going forward?
Well, I think with stockpiles, there's really only 2 approaches you can take, and one is you destroy them, and that's what's happened in Kenya, for example. It's happened with illegal seizures in China and the United States. And in the case here, we're not sure in China what's going to happen, but they've given people a year's grace period to sell off stockpiles. And so what that says is if you bought this legally, you now have a grace period to get rid of it. But the important thing is that market ends. And if you're a seller or owner of ivory at this point in China, my advice would be to sell as cheaply and quickly as possible, because you need to get rid of it. So, we'll see what happens with that stockpile, but if it's put on the market, certainly the price will go down. And one of the problems has been people who've been hoarding ivory as almost like a speculation or an investment. Now that market ends at the end of 2017, that investment will be worth nothing. So you've got to liquidate it now.
Now, it's one thing to impose these bans, but a lot of people have a lot of pessimism about the enforcement of them, especially as long as demand still exists in other countries, neighboring countries like Vietnam and Thailand. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there is a degree of whack-a-mole here that, the trade tends to move to the weakest places. And we've seen this with shark fin trade as well. It's moved out of China into places like Vietnam, where laws have been weaker, enforcement's been weaker. But even in Vietnam now, they're doing education campaigns. In July next year, they'll pass legal reform, which will mean that people can actually be arrested for selling these products. So we're seeing progress there. And each time it moves, it does get less. And we're hopeful this year we'll see sea change after China's leadership in places like Vietnam.
And speaking of that change, so how do you see China's move affecting whether other countries will follow going forward, and what could potentially be some of the biggest challenges in getting countries on board?
Well, I think, for example, Hong Kong has said 5 years to phase out its ivory trade, and we hope this move from Beijing will encourage them to speed up that timetable, because the elephants need the help now. The last country really standing on ivory trade now is going to be Japan, and we hope that Japan will sort of fall in line with the global community and join the world in trying to save the elephant by ending its own domestic ivory market.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you for your insights. Peter Knight, Executive Director of WildAid.